네, 안녕하세요. 저는 무엇보다도 발달장애 26살 먹은 올해로 김진우 아빠이고요. 저는 충남 서천이라고 하는 시골 마을에서 한 10여 년 발달장애인들하고 다양한 종류의 예술활동을 해왔습니다. 그래서 이 자리에 있게 됐고요. 또한 중등학교에서 미술교사로 한 30년 가까이 재직을 했고요. 지금은 개인적으로 작업을 해가면서 다양한 교육 공간에서 예술활동을 지원하는 그런 활동을 하고 있습니다. 네, 김인규라고 합니다. 오늘 소개해드릴 크리에이티브 그로스 예술센터는 1974년에 설립되어서 160명 가까이 장애 예술가들이 참여를 하고 있는 예술단체이고요. 이 공간을 중심으로 작품을 제작하고 또는 디자인 작품을 출시하고 다양한 예술활동을 전개하고 있다고 합니다. 크리에이티브 그로스 예술센터를 대표해서 톰 디 마리아 이사님께서 자리해 주셨습니다. 톰 디 마리아 이사님의 강의를 듣고 몇 가지 질문을 드려보도록 하겠습니다.
So hello, everybody, and I'd like to talk to you today about Creative Growth Art Center in Oakland, California. My name is Tom DiMaria, and I've been the director there for 23 years, since 1999. The first image we're going to look at is a photograph of creative growth artist Judith Scott. And when Judith Scott was born, she was born with Down syndrome in the 1940s. And at the time when she was born, it was normal for people with disabilities to have to spend their lives in hospitals or hidden away. And that's what she did. But as an adult, when disability ideas changed, she came to creative growth and started to make a series of sculptures by accumulating objects and wrapping them in fiber. And Judith, who did not have language, made this series of sculptures for 20 years in our center. And essentially, it was her only form of communication and language with the world. This is the Brooklyn Art Museum in New York City, and this is a retrospective of Judith's work. And we also will see her work here, exhibited in Tokyo. This is at the Shiseido Gallery in the Ginza in Tokyo a few years ago, a very contemporary presentation. And now here's another creative growth artist, William Scott, and this is his presentation of work in London just a few months ago in a very contemporary setting. So how have we arrived at a place where artists with disabilities are now being seen as contemporary artists? This is William Scott's billboard presentation as part of his work in London. And he was asked to do community engaged artwork with the city. And this is a photograph of Dan Miller on the right, who's another creative growth artist, selecting his large drawings with two gallerists from Paris. And they're selecting work for his exhibition. And notice we present Dan's work as Dan Miller in a contemporary gallery, like any other artist would have a major exhibition in New York or Paris. And this is the work of creative growth artist Susan Janow, who's a video artist, and a presentation of her work at the Brooklyn Museum in New York, a public screening during the summer there. In English, these are some of the words we have used to describe work by artists with disabilities. And we'll talk about those a little bit now as I kind of go through the history. So I feel to understand where artists with disabilities are now, we have to look very briefly at the history of how people with disabilities were first seen as artists. And it starts more in Europe with this psychiatrist named Dr. Hans Prinzhorn. And he led a program at this hospital, which was the psychiatric hospital in Heidelberg, Germany. And he started to notice that a lot of the patients in the hospital were making work that he found to be very interesting. And he was the first person to start to show it in art galleries and to other artists to say, I think this is very interesting art. So he essentially brought it out of the hospital, and it started to be of interest to the community and to artists. And then this is Germany in the 1930s. What happened was the Nazis came to power, and Hitler condemned people with disabilities and artists, and it stopped the appreciation and understanding of this work. Much of the art was destroyed. Many of the people were killed, both the artists and the people with disabilities in the Holocaust. So it was a terrible time. And it stopped the thinking about how artists and people with disabilities could work together. So it's really now, we'll look at after the war, the artist Jean Dubuffet in the next slide, who will started the thinking of, in France in the late 1940s and 1950s, after the war. He's an artist himself and a noted contemporary artist. And he becomes interested in art made by people that didn't go to art school or that didn't have formal training. And he calls it in French, art brut. Brut in French means raw or uncooked. And he's looking for artists that are making work that just comes from the body and comes from the spirit, and it doesn't come from art school. And he studies all kinds of artists doing this, including artists with disabilities. So Jean Dubuffet collects a huge body of work, multiple paintings and sculptures, and he wants to leave them to a museum in France, but the French don't accept this work, this art brut collection that he's amassed. And they say it's not cultured enough, it's not academic. So he leaves this collection to the city of Lausanne, Switzerland, which is now housed there in this building, the collection of art brut. And if you go in there, you'll see in the next slide that it's very dark walls and a fantastic collection of work there. And this was really the first appreciation in museum presentation of art made by people with disabilities and people who made art outside of the academic thinking of the time. So this is an important change. And then Dubuffet's writings, which were in French at the time, in the 1970s, get written up by the English art historian named Roger Cardinal. And Roger comes up with the word in English called outsider art to describe work made by people who are not inside the art world. They're not inside the academic consideration of the time, but they're somehow outside the gallery and museum system. And this happens in the 1970s. In the English-speaking world, we use outsider art still as a term to describe many people who are not academically trained. So this is happening in the 1970s. And at the same time, in the 1970s, in the San Francisco Bay Area, where creative growth is, in Oakland, California, which is right near San Francisco, something else is happening in terms of the changing social structure. People with disabilities who had lived their entire lives in hospitals and institutions are now being freed from these hospitals and being put back into society. And also there's a change of in society in the Bay Area where we have something with the hippies. If you're familiar with the hippies are coming into society. We have a move for free speech, free societies, changing down barriers around isolation. So when these people in California with disabilities are being sent from the hospitals, no one quite knows what to do. So we have two people in Berkeley, California, a man who's a psychiatrist and his wife who's an artist, the Katzes. And they say, well, these people can come to our home and we can make art here. And they put paint and art supplies in the garage of their house. And they say, art will be the path forward. And this is how people with disabilities will advance into the world, and we'll have a gallery, and the gallery will show their work. So while that might seem like a kind of normal idea now, back in the 1970s, it was a very radical idea. And to our knowledge, the starting of creative growth in 1972 is the first such project like this in the world. And we're almost 50 years old. This image is one of the earlier photographs we have at Creative Growth when we moved into a big space. This is probably 1981 or 1982. And it still looks like almost a hospital setting, institutional. And if you compare it with what the program looks like today in the same space, you'll see in the next slide how the work in the studio has changed. So this is what the space looks like today. So this is our big studio in Oakland, California. And we serve 160 artists with disabilities in our program. Of course, with COVID, we're serving fewer people now, but normally that's what we serve. And if you look at this space, you'll see that it's organized by media. So in the front, we have a wood shop. In the middle area on the right, we have a ceramic studio. In front of that, we have drawing and painting. On the left side, there's fabric and sculpture and rug making. So the studio is organized by media, and the artist moves through that studio to engage in different programs. And this is what our people look like today. So very much more a community of people being artistic and having friends and really coming to a place that they enjoy to come to. I want to talk a little bit about some of the different ways that we serve our artists at Creative Growth. So once again, we're one of the oldest centers in the world for artists with disabilities. And here you'll see normally the artists work in groups together based around media. So the people in the middle of this slide, they're working on painting and drawing. The people in the front are doing more sewing. But it's very important to us to know that Creative Growth is founded on the idea that we're all artists working together. So myself and the Creative Growth artists are, and the Creative Growth staff artists, we're all artists. So we just allow the person with disabilities to move forward and find their own way. We don't really tell them very much what to do or what they should be doing. We ask them what they want to do. What are they thinking about? What kinds of images do they want to make? And we find that if we allow enough time and encourage them to be creative in their own way, the results are spectacular. This is a slide of our rug making program, which is one of the programs we have where the artists make designs onto the canvas and then stitch the handmade rugs. So one of the questions people ask is, how do people come to Creative Growth? Do they have to be an artist first? And we always sort of say, no. They come and they look at the space. And if there's any indication that they're interested to coming to work with us, they start coming a few days a week. This slide, this is the artist Dan Miller making a painting. And and you can see that he's working with a Creative Growth staff artist. And in this next slide as well, this is the artist Maureen Clay working with a staff artist named Julie. And the role of the staff is very important at Creative Growth, because we feel that their job is to support the artist. Here in this case, we see Julie is pouring paint, or in this next image, Michael is helping Gal on the computer. So we help them technically, or we help them to access materials, but we don't tell them what to do. And we don't say, you need to do this today, you need to do that today. We might say, how can we help you find paper? What paint do you want to use today? Here's a problem with the computer. Maybe I can help you solve that. And this is an image of during COVID, we have a fashion program. So the artists do a lot of crocheting and making their own clothing. So we'll see that. And I think, I look at a piece like this, and if we had a traditional program where we would say, let's make shirts and dresses, we wouldn't get something that looked like this. So we let the artists move forward in their own way. And that's the most important. So artists can also come to Creative Growth from 1 to 5 days a week, and they come for free and they can stay their whole life. So of course, the program is very filled with people. So if you wanted to come, you'd probably be on a waiting list until we had a place for you, but that usually doesn't take too long. So many of our artists have been coming for 10, 20, 30 years, and some come for a very short time because sometimes their health isn't so good or they move away. So we really encourage them to come and stay for a long time. This is Miguel's drawing, very obsessive drawing of these flowers. And, it took Miguel many years to start to use big paper to this size and to make work that was so obsessive and compelling. We believe that providing good materials and a lot of time and support is the best way to move our artists forward. I also want to talk a little bit about how we fund our program, because, unlike some countries, we don't get a lot of government money. So we get some money from the state of California to support people with disabilities. We have a budget of $3 million US. So we get just under $1 million from the state of California to support people with disabilities. And then we get $1 million from the sale of artwork, which goes to the artists. And then we get another $1 million from foundations and private individuals who make contributions. This slide here is a photo of the Creative Growth Gallery. And the gallery is very important because from the very beginning of Creative Growth, the idea was that the gallery would be a place where the public would come in and see the artist's work and be able to purchase the artist's work, which would give money to the artist, but also importantly, to meet the artists. And remember, in the 70s and 80s, and even today, most people in their everyday life don't really have a chance to have meaningful interactions, conversations, friendships with people with disabilities or people with intellectual disabilities. So this is an important meeting place. And if we look at the next slide, when people come to the gallery and to an opening and really come in and meet the artists and enjoy the work, it's really a great time. For the artists who have often spent a lot of their life alone or separated from society, this is a really great time for them when they can show their achievement, they can show their work, they can meet people who are very appreciative of what they do, they can sell their work, and it's an important part of creative growth. And this gallery is in the same building as the studio. So the studio and the gallery function together. Something else that Creative Growth does is that we do contemporary design projects, because we feel like that's a way for our artists to participate in some commercial projects and also have their work seen by a very large number of people around the United States. This is the boutique of their clothing in the Barney's department store in New York, where we had a section before COVID of our artists' work. And we do other kinds of projects as well. We've designed skateboards and t-shirts for other companies. Again, we want our artists to be a part of contemporary culture. And here, the work of Creative Growth, a Creative Growth artist, is used by a London fashion designer who uses her designs to make fabric and clothing. Here you're looking at 4 soap bottles that we designed with a company called Method, which is a US-based national products company. So here we worked with the company to have 4 of our artists design bottles. It was great because they also came to the studio and the artists got to see the designs, and we helped pick the smell and the scent of the soap. But also importantly, when we do a project like this, we use it as an opportunity to share information about who our artists are and what our program is. So we did these kinds of presentations, showing the artist and showing how they're designing the product to give more understanding about who the artist is. And another thing we did is when the bottles were sold in stores, we crafted this kind of signage that went in the stores along with it. The project was called Designing for Good, and it explained the collaboration between creative growth artists with disabilities and the store and the soap company and how that would work. So this was a very big project, and we sold almost 3 million bottles of soap in the United States. And all of the soap came with the information about creative growth and how to support creative growth, and how artists with disabilities and people with disabilities were a valuable part of society. So I think that for a small nonprofit like Creative Growth, a small NGO, we were really able to impact a lot of people. But I want to come back a little bit to the artists and their work. This chair is an amazing piece of art for me. It's made by an artist named Carl Hendrickson. And Carl is no longer alive, but Carl was a man with cerebral palsy, and he was losing his capacity to use his body and to speak. So very slowly over time, he built this chair to hold his body. And because he knew he would no longer be able to sit easily in a chair when he ate his lunch. So he built this to use at Creative Growth. And if you look at the black tray table in the front where it says yes and no, he knew also that he would no longer be able to speak. So he put the words into the tray so that he could try to point to the answer if we asked him a question. Carl, are you hungry? And he would try to point to yes, or Carl, are you hungry? And he would try to point to no. And I think the idea of building something that's a sculpture and an artwork, but it's also something that's an essential part of how you live in the world is such an important idea, and really speaks to how artists with disabilities can really through their artwork, communicate with us about what their lives are what their lives are like, what they're thinking about, what their issues are. So that leads me into thinking more about how do we allow our artists to tell us who they are, as opposed to us expecting them to make art in a particular way. This is the artist Dan Miller. We saw some of his work earlier. So Dan's story is interesting. Dan is on the autism spectrum, and Dan didn't speak as a boy growing up. But his mother thought maybe if she spelled words with him, he would start to speak. So she would spell all kinds of words with him. Electric, E-L-E-C-T-R-I-C, because he liked electrical things. Danny, his name, D-A-N-N-Y. So circle, C-I-R-C-L-E. So Dan never spoke those words, but when he came to Creative Growth at age 21, he had learned how to spell all these words. And instead of speaking them, he started to draw and paint them. So here in this drawing, we see this is a drawing about circles and about electric circles and circuits, which he likes, and his name, Danny. So Dan is speaking to us, but he's speaking to us in a way that's specific to how he wants to communicate. And if we see over time, the way his work evolved It started with writing, and then it became more and more abstract, to the point where the words are increasingly hidden. And I think that's important because most contemporary artists become more and more abstract as their practice advances. Sometimes I hear that artists with disabilities don't advance in the same way that academically trained artists do, and I think that's wrong. We'll see in an artist like Dan Miller or other creative growth artists that their work gets more and more advanced. In Dan's work, it is now very large, and you can see as it advances that it's a much more completely abstract form. Now, this is another artist named Carlos Perez. And one of the things that we think about at Creative Growth is how do we allow the artist to tell us what they want to do? So Carlos is very shy, and he doesn't really speak much. He's on the autism spectrum. And he really wasn't responding much to drawing on paper or other things, but he took a liking to the iPad and started to make drawings on the iPad that he would then erase. But slowly over time, he started to let people look at them. And then he wanted to print them. But when he printed them on paper, they didn't seem the same to him. So we printed them onto film, and then we put them on light boxes, and he loves the way they look. So it allows Carlos to show his work in a way that's meaningful to him, that he is proud. And I think that if we had said he could only do one thing, only draw on paper or only print on paper, his work would not be as interesting. So at Creative Growth, we work on a idea called person first learning, which means that we work with the artist, the person, about what they want to do and try to give them as much information. So this is an amazing artist. Her name is Monica Valentine. So Monica came to Creative Growth a few years ago and made some drawings in the beginning, but really didn't know what else to do until she went into a sewing area and she found pins and needles and beads and sequins and found styrofoam objects in the garbage, the styrofoam that comes packing around computers or other things. And she started to make these beautifully decorated sculptures out of pins. And one day she found a head that would hold a wig from a store. And she made this beautiful sequined head with sort of the face and the eyes in red sort of burning through the face. And the thing that's interesting about Monica is that when we look at her sculptures, is that Monica is completely blind. So she has orthotic eyes. She has no vision at all, but she says she can feel the color of the pins and the beads in her hands, and that tells her how she should make her sculpture. So the idea of directing Monica and telling her what she should be doing, as opposed to allowing her to do what she does, became a better path forward. I say you have to imagine what you can't imagine. I would never imagine that Monica could do this. I mean, look at this sculpture here with the blue eyes and the red nose and the way the colors arranged. And to think that you are seeing a sculpture that she has never seen, but she has felt it. So she has brought something else to the work that is beyond anything we could think of. So allow the artist to find their own path, because they will be able to offer you information about them in a way that you might not imagine. So now increasingly, we're looking at how our artists can be as much in control or have as much curatorial presence on their own work. So we've started to give the gallery over to some artists to do site-specific work. So this is the artist Nicole Storm with her work. Nicole has been working with us for 20 years or so. And at first she made these drawings on cardboard like you see here, and she would make them sort of very privately and hide them. And then slowly she started to allow people to see them, and they got bigger. And when we gave her the gallery, she did two things. One is she took some of the drawings she already had and she started to hang them on the wall. But then she also put paper on the wall and painted on it, and she painted the entire gallery. So she really became a thoughtful artist in terms of how she could arrange the work in a gallery presentation. So how does she start to think about her work curatorially? And she's a very prolific artist. So we start to see more and more of her work to the point where the gallery got completely overwhelmed by the amount of work she presented. And here in this image, we see a review of the show from the New York Times leading art critic who says that Nicole Storm, another talent from Creative Growth, along with Judith Scott and Dan Miller, that her drawings and paintings were featured is in one of the highlight exhibitions of the year. So she moved from an artist in our studio who was doing work that was hidden into an artist who became more sure of herself, into an artist who did an installation in our gallery, into an artist who had a show in New York with a great review. Another artist we gave our gallery over to is named Eli Cooper. And this is Eli. And during COVID, when we were completely closed, most of our artists, like Eli, were sort of stuck at home, like many of us were. So he was home for a long time. And when we reopened the gallery, we said to Eli, well, do you want to make an exhibition in the gallery that is considering what it was like to be stuck at home during the pandemic? So he said yes. So he came into the gallery and essentially he installed it to look like his home. And here, in his bedroom, he has collages on the wall that we see here with all the images of people that he likes from pop culture. And below, we see boxes of sodas and 7-Up and Coca-Cola that he likes to order at home. And he also likes to watch music videos, is something he did during the pandemic. So with the green screen, he made his own music videos. So instead of watching other people's videos, he made his own. Here, he's making a video as a tribute to Freddie Mercury, Give Me Somebody to Love. And so he really created an entire installation in the gallery. Also really interesting is this is Eli. As part of the exhibition in the gallery, he is shown here with the twin sister of Judith Scott, who we talked about earlier. And he put 2 sculptures of Judith Scott in the gallery. And because he said, as Eli has Down syndrome and Judith had Down syndrome, he said Judith was his hero and his role model growing up because he used to come to Creative Growth as a boy. And he wanted to pay tribute to her in his own exhibition because she meant so much to him. So for me, this is a very important image because what we're seeing here is a sort of passing of the baton or a changing of the generation, where Judith Scott, a woman who was born with Down syndrome and lived most of her life in an institution where she was not given language or access to any art materials, and yet came out and became an artist, has herself inspired young artists with Down syndrome, because now the artists are learning from each other, and people with disabilities are role models for other people with disabilities. So this is a very important idea for Creative Growth, and I think a very important moment in terms of how she's influenced other artists. And then I'm going to just close here with one more presentation of the artist William Scott. This is William wearing a suit he painted. William had a very contemporary exhibition in New York. His work is currently on view in Malmö, Sweden, in a very contemporary art exhibition there. And William, William's work involves making people's lives better, and religion is a part of his work. So he did these big posters of his work called Blessed on the churches around the exhibition, because he wanted people when they were going to church to see his work and understand it and to see who he was. And his work is just filled with so much hope. And here's William. So on the left, we see he paints these skyscrapers in New York and San Francisco in the way that he wants the world to be, happier and better, with better buildings and everyone living in good places. And on the right, an amazing portrait with a spaceship at the top called Science Fiction. And what William does is, through these spaceships, he brings people back to life who have died for bad reasons. They've used drugs or they've been killed by guns, and he brings them and offers them a new life. And here in the next slide, he also will paint his own life to be different. So this is him as a boy with his life of the new mother. So what he's doing is he's painting his own life as a child again, where he's happy, he doesn't have disabilities, his family is happy, his father is alive, his mother is young. So he really sees painting as a way to change his life, make the world a better place. And I think he's such an inspiration to us in terms of how he brings the spirit of creativity forward. And again, this is William painting himself back in 1975. So he's doing something very conceptual. He's painting history. He's painting the past to change the future. So in 1975, as opposed to being a kid with a disability in school that was maybe made fun of or not liked, he's back in 1975 as the basketball star. So he's really crafting the way he wants his life to be through his art. And again, here we see science fiction of the future, people coming back to life to lead better lives. William's goal is to have everyone have a very, very happy life. And in his exhibition in Sweden, they asked him to do a poster for the show, which we'll see here. And William's very engaged with his art presentations. And this is the poster he did for Sweden. Praise Frisco, we want peace and love for all. And I'm sure he'd wish that to you and everyone that's hearing about him and the creative growth artists today. So to summarize, we believe that art is the path forward for people with disabilities, that having artists lead them into a program where they can take their time and create art in any way that they want is an amazing opportunity for them. And as people who appreciate their work and as viewers, we all get to benefit from that vision. So on behalf of the Creative Growth Artists, I'll thank you for your time and look forward to your questions. Thank you.